Druid is a class that's had me curious since the first beta. Some videos say it's broken and others say it's trash, so I decided to theorycraft and make a build for my second main class in Diablo 4. Today, we're going to be discussing the Landslide build for Druid, which is in my opinion seeming like the strongest option based on server slam results and all my theory crafting. Today's video is going to be broken down like this. First, we'll talk about aspects and boons, next, skills, then ability synergies, and finally, my skill leveling order for launch. So to start off the build, we're going to start with the aspects that I think make this build really good. I'm not going to talk about uniques in this video, but I am going to talk about some of the aspects that I'm theory crafting are going to make this build very strong. To start, we have the aspect of natural balance, and this is a key thing that makes this build strong. It basically creates a synergy loop between our basic skill and our core skill. Seeing as we have a storm basic skill and an earth core skill, what this aspect basically does is make a core loop where every time I use a storm skill, it amplifies an earth skill, and then when I use an earth skill, it's amplifying my storm skill. So it goes back and forth and creates a nice synergy loop. The next aspect I'm going to talk about is aspect of the aftershock. This one is a no-brainer for me because it enhances the damage of our core damaging skill, Landslide. So for the third offensive aspect, I've changed my mind on this one a few times, but we're actually going to take in this build the aspect of the alpha. This basically transforms our wolf companions into werewolf companions, dealing more damage and offering them the ability to spread rabies. Now, that sounds pretty funny, but it's an actual skill. It's basically a poison dot. That's pretty strong. Now that we've talked about the offensive aspects, I'm going to talk about the defensive and the one utility aspect that I think helped this build a lot. Both of our defensive aspects are going to focus on enhancing our one defensive ability, Earthen Bulwark. The first aspect of Mending Stone, is going to increase the duration of our shield and also replenish a percentage of the active barrier every time we kill an enemy with an Earth skill, which, as you're going to see in the skills, is going to happen very often. Then, for an additional defensive, we're going to gain 15 to 25% bonus amount on our next shield for every enemy we CC, and as you'll see again in the skills, that's going to happen a lot. So we're going to have a very strong shield with these two aspects. Finally, for our last aspect, damage from Earth skills is going to slow enemies hit by 25 to 50% for 5 seconds. This is going to be really helpful and synergize well with the build because, as you're going to see in the skills, we need a lot of CC in this comp, and slows in general are very strong. Anyway, moving on to the boons, we'll start with the snake. First, I'm going to take Obsidian Slam because, quite frankly, none of these other options really benefit our build that well, so having the overpower on our 10th kill is going to be a decent nice to have. Next, for the Wolf Tree, we're going to take Calamity to increase the duration of Petrify by 25%. This is going to be really nice to have and keep enemies CC'd for longer, amplifying our damage. Next, for the Eagle Row, we're going to take both Scythe Talons and Avian Wrath. The reason for this is because this build depends a lot on your crit strike chance and has a lot of modifiers for your crit strike damage. Finally, for the Deer section, we're going to take the 10 extra Spirit because this build does struggle a bit with Spirit, but don't worry too much because I have thought about that and included it in my skill choices. Next, I'm going to talk through the skills of the build, how it works, and some of my reasoning for why I think the build is going to be strong. So, like I talked about in the aspect section, Storm Strike is going to be our basic skill. We're going to take Enhanced, and we're going to take Wild Storm Strike. The reason for this is a synergy I'll explain a little bit later. Next, for the core section, surprise, surprise, like I alluded to before, Landslide is going to be our primary source of damage. Then we're going to take both of the enhancements and go towards Primal Landslide. So I do need to explain Primal Landslide a little bit because it's a very important mechanic for this build. Basically, anytime we immobilize or stun an enemy, we gain a Terramote. You can basically keep generating them, and every time you cast Landslide, you'll spend them, and they're going to amplify the crit strike of our Landslide. Also, as a nice plus, any ability we hit on a boss has a 10% chance to grant a Terramote, which is a nice to have. Anyway, making sure we maximize Terramote is going to be very important because we want to be critting as much as possible, and every time we use a Terramote, we're guaranteeing ourselves a crit. So, understanding some of the key mechanics of this build, like Enhanced Storm Strike, is very important. Now that we talked about Terramote, I need to explain kind of how this works. So basically, with base Storm Strike, we're going to cast a Lightning Bolt, and it's going to have a 15% chance to immobilize all enemies hit for 2.5 seconds. In the base skill, it also mentions that this is going to chain up to 3 surrounding enemies. Then, with the additional modification we've made, it chains to 2 additional targets. So basically, anytime we're fighting massive packs of enemies, we're going to have a 15% chance to immobilize them and generate a Terramote. We're also going to have another way to generate Terramotes later in the build, but I'll also talk about that when I get there. Anyway, before we leave the core section, we're going to get Heart of the Wild for a little bit of extra spirit, and also 3 points into abundance to increase our spirit generation. Because like I mentioned before, spirit generation, at least from what I played in the server slam, felt pretty difficult. Anyway, moving on to the defensive, like I mentioned in the aspect section, we're going to take Earthen Bulwark. For the modifications, we're going to take Enhanced Earthen Bulwark for the Unstoppable, and then we're going to take Preserving Earthen Bulwark for the Fortification. Basically, this ability is just going to make us super tanky. Now, when it comes to the companion section, you really can choose any of these 3 options. For me, I like having the wolves because they stay up pretty often, and it's nice to have 2 extra enemies to grab enemy pressure and also just be out there in general. Anyway, going back to the companion section, we're also going to take 3 points in Call of the Wild to increase the damage of wolves. Moving on to the Wrath section, I'm going to take Boulder with Enhanced Boulder and Savage Boulder. Now, I do want to explain something about Boulder because it can help us with generating Terramotes. So if you read Enhanced Boulder, it says, when Boulder reaches the end of its path, enemies hit are slowed by 30% for 3 seconds. But if the Boulder is overpowered, enemies are stunned for 4 seconds instead. Now, also, as you saw in the Boons, I did take Obsidian Slam. So every 10th kill, if you're able to min-max this and understand how this buff works, you can actually almost every time guarantee that your Boulder is going to be the overpowered skill. Now, I will mention, this is going to require you to be a lot more active and think much more about your ability usage. But if you do, your Terramote generation is going to be insane. That's about it for Boulder, but before we leave the Wrath section, we're also going to grab 2 points into Elemental Exposure. The reason for this is because I personally really like applying Vulnerable debuff, and if you watch my Rogue video, I think it's a very, very strong thing to have in general. Anyway, moving on to the Ultimate section, we're going to take Petrify with both the enhancements. Now, Petrify is important to understand because it's a big source of CC and also enhances the amount of critical strike damage that we're dealing. And then also to note this, against bosses, this is amplified even more. So if you manage to stack up your Terramotes and then use Petrify on a boss, you will absolutely shred them. And then as an extra nice to have, with Supreme Petrify, we're also getting Spirit back when we kill an enemy that's affected by Petrify. Finally, for the passive, I'm going to go Earthen Might, and I'm going to talk about my reasoning here. So the main thing to pay attention here is the bottom, where it says the chance is increased by 10% for critical strikes and 10% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. And with the build we're running, we can actually satisfy all 4 of these conditions. See, with all the critical strike modifiers we've taken so far, you're very often critting. On top of that, if you want to generate Terramotes to enhance your critical strikes, you should be stunning, immobilizing, and knockbacking enemies all the time. What this means is if you're playing the build properly, you have a much higher chance to proc Earthen Might, and that's very important because this will help a lot with your spirit problems and then also increase your critical strikes for 5 seconds. But that's going to do it for the build. I do really want to hear your guys' thoughts on this build and how you think it's going to play. Like I said, I did get to play this in the server slam, but I didn't get to play it with this many skill points, so I am pretty curious about how this build's going to function. Now that I've gone through the build with all of my reasoning and all of the logic I put into the build, I want to show you the order that I'm going to level the skills personally. Starting off, I'm going to get a point in Storm Strike and I'm going to get 1 point in Enhanced. Then we want to get Landslide active as early as possible with both the modifications to start getting Terramotes. Then I'm going to take Wild Storm Strike to make sure I'm hitting more targets and increase my chance to immobilize enemies and generate Terramotes. Next, I'm going to get the base ability for Earthen Bulwark with both the modifications. Then for the 2 points I need to move into my companion, I'm going to get a point in Heart of the Wild and 1 point in Abundance. Next, I'm going to get the base ability for Wolves and then finish off Landslide to increase the damage. Then, now that we're in the Wrath section, I'm going to get the base ability for Boulder with both the modifications. Then, I'm going to get my modifiers for Wolves with my 2 points in Elemental Exposure. The reason for this is that the damage increase on Boulder is not substantial, and the damage increase on Wolves can be passed up for the extra things we're getting with the extra points. Now that we have enough points to get our ultimate, I'm going to get Petrify with both of the modifications. Now, with these 7 points, you can be creative, but this is the route that I think I'm going to go. So I'm going to get Crushing Earth with 3 points in Safeguard for the fortification. Next, I'm going to get 3 points in Call of the Wild to increase the damage of Wolves. Now that we have enough points filled out, I'm going to get my passive and then go back through the build and enhance my other abilities. Now that we have the passive unlocked, the build is technically air quote done. But the way you go about applying your points here is completely up to you. This is the way I'm going to do it. So I'm going to go back into Abundance and finish it off. Then I'm going to go into Earthen Bulwark because I personally value having a higher base stat line for this ability. Then I'm going to put points into Wolves because the damage, in my opinion, is more substantial than the damage on Boulder. But finally, we're going to put our last 4 points into Boulder here, and that puts us to level 49, which is where I personally decided to stop this build. I could have theory crafted further and done the Paragon board, but for me, I just feel like it's not very genuine to do that without testing and getting to play with it and fully understand the possibilities and the capabilities of all the things I'm talking about. But anyway, at this point, that's the end of the build. I do really want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you do have any thoughts, suggestions, your own theory crafted builds, I would love to hear it, and I look forward to reading the comments. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more Diablo 4 content that'll come out much more frequently when the game is officially released. Thank you for watching, hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.